It's my privilege to pass the baton as we get this thing started to a person, a woman who, as an advocate for the UN Secretary General's Sustainable Development Agenda, and someone who has a remarkable resume, a remarkable bio, leading a conversation today, it's my privilege to turn over the day, and I think it makes sense that you should be leading off everything to Alaa Murabit. Please help me to welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I got very excited when they told me there would be no questions because it was 7 a.m. And I was like, fine, I won't be held accountable for anything I say. And then they were like, oh, but they all are media people and they live tweet. And I was like, hey, so I'll be held accountable globally. So be nice to me, please. So I'm one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goal advocates from the Secretary General's office. And what that means, so to my little brother, that's cool because Messi is one of the 17 advocates. To my little sister, it's cool because Shakira is. And they're confused as to why I'm in that space, which is fair, I suppose. But the 17 advocates are meant to both bring attention to the goals globally, but also meet with governments, businesses, civil society, and really engage with the local populations as well, which is why it's key to have people who can fill stadiums. And my dad jokes and be like, people who can fill brains. And I'm like, you know what, thanks. Somebody give me something. So I got involved in the United Nations because when I was 21, I started a women's rights organization in Libya, North Africa, which focused on women's inclusion in political participation, peace processes, and conflict resolution. And what that basically means is that when there's a war, women are overly involved. They help, particularly in supply lines, they help engage with the global community, they help inform, things like that, relay information, keep hospitals open, schools open, etc. And yet, once the conflict ends, women are completely sidelined. And it becomes very much about bringing the war, the kingpin and the kingpin to the table. And it never made sense to me to bring two people who have the most to lose from peace to the table rather than the people who have the most to gain from it. Because obviously war is economically beneficial to some people, and that's why it lasts so long. So my organization got involved, and one day the United Nations came to Libya. They had a political mission there, and they were working on transitional justice. And so in walked these team from the UN, and there were the Libyan counterparts. And the UN team says to the Libyan counterparts, where are your women? Because I was the only one in the room. And so the head of our delegation said, but where are yours? Because the UN hadn't brought any. And to me, this was indicative of a bigger problem. Oftentimes, for many of us around the world, for me, almost every day, the UN represents two very conflicting ideas in my head. It is this wonderful, it has wonderful potential. It genuinely does. It is the greatest vehicle for social change. We knew that from the Millennium Development Goals. But unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't translate on the ground. And unfortunately, many people in the world view it as being hypocritical, or view it as being selective justice and selective peace. And so I became overly critical of the UN. And when I say overly, I'm saying that generously. And I started commenting on what I thought they could be doing better in Libya. And over time, I began to work more and more with them because I found it easier to actually be able to implement that change once I was in the room. And the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are really a culmination of that. The Millennium Development Goals, which happened in the year 2000, covered many of the same topics, but they did not have what, in my opinion, is the single most important goal, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. That was considered too political at the time to push. And so the reason I got so involved with the Sustainable Development Goals is because we all know the analogy, you can buy a man fish, but you can teach him to fish, right? And people who, and I believe all the goals are exceptionally interconnected, and that's why, you could teach a man to fish, but if there's no ocean or lake, he can't fish. If there are tanks on the ocean or lake, he won't go to fish. We need to start teaching women to fish because, they make 50% of the population, and turns out they actually put more money back into communities than their male counterparts, and we need to educate people to fish. So it's all exceptionally interconnected. But to me, ultimately, if you've lived in a conflict zone, and the vast majority of people in the world either live in conflict or post-conflict zones or below the poverty line, to them saying, you know what, let's focus on these things without focusing on the fact that your daughter should be able to go to school without feeling unsafe. Not because you don't want her to not get educated. We've gone to different countries in the world and said, well, you should send your girls to school. It's very important. And mothers will say, we want to. but we want them to live more than we want them to be educated. And so recognizing that these all have to work together and we have to work to be able to bring them to the table. Now, I know that all of you are like, it's very early in the morning. Tell us what we can do. And I'm here. I'm here to give you your action point. First and foremost is getting the word out. We can't do something if we don't know about it. And the vast majority of the world, unfortunately, does not know the Sustainable Development Goals. Because whoever told you the UN was very good at media outreach was not working with the UN. So I'm basically hoping that you guys will take on that role and really get the word out. And it can be individual stories of people who have made significant and amazing change. So over the next 2 days, you'll get to meet a lot of those individuals. Or it can be, you can take one of the goals that you think is key, gender equality, and start talking about how if a girl is educated for a year, for 2 years, she increases the national GDP by 2 to 3%. Those are not small numbers. If we were to equally educate and employ all the girls and the women in the world today, we could have greater growth than China and India combined. So I mean, if we can get those messages out there, if we can say, you know what, we're digging the wrong tunnels when we talk about war and bombs and drones, we should be talking about schools, hospitals. We should be talking about how we actually sustain this planet because we don't really have another one. Now, the best people to talk about this, in my opinion, are youth. And I say that because I'm like, so when I was 21, I was told I'd have 4 challenges, and one of them was age. And the guy said to me, but you're lucky, you'll grow out of it. So I say that humbly as still being a part of that group, hopefully. But I would love to introduce our youth panel so that they can come in and continue this conversation. Thank you.